Chapter 48. A Family Affair. Athos had found the right expression. It was necessary to call Buckingham's a family affair. A family affair was not subject to the investigation of the cardinal. A family affair concerned no one. They might occupy themselves before all the world with a family affair. Aramis had found the idea, the valets. Porthos had found the means, the diamond. D'Artagnan alone, generally the most inventive of the four, had found nothing, but we must also confess that the very name of her ladyship paralyzed him. Yet we are mistaken, he had found a purchaser of the diamond. The breakfast at Monsieur de Treville's was charmingly gay. D'Artagnan had already got his uniform. As he was about the same size as Aramis, and as Aramis, being so handsomely paid, as may be remembered, by the bookseller who had bought his poem, had furnished himself with everything in duplicate, he had accommodated his friend with a complete equipment. D'Artagnan would have been completely happy had he not seen her ladyship like a dark cloud on the horizon. After the breakfast, they agreed to meet again in the evening at Athos's quarters in order to terminate their arrangements. D'Artagnan passed the day in displaying his musketeer's uniform in every avenue throughout the camp. At the appointed time in the evening, the four friends assembled. There were but three things left to decide: what they should write to the lady's brother-in-law, what they should write to the clever person at Tours, and which of the valets should be the bearer of the letters. For the latter purpose each offered his own. Athos vaunted the discretion of Grimaud, who only spoke when his master permitted him to open his mouth. Porthos boasted of the strength of Mousqueton, who was big enough to drub four men of ordinary dimensions. Aramis, confident in the cunning of Bazin, made a pompous eulogium on his candidate, and lastly D'Artagnan had entire dependence in Planchet's bravery, and recalled to their minds how well he had behaved in their most hazardous encounter at Calais. These four virtues for a long time contended for the mastery, and gave occasion for some magnificent speeches, which we shall not report, lest they should be deemed tiresome. Unhappily, said Athos, it is necessary that he whom we send should possess in himself all four qualities united. But where can we find such a servant? It is impossible, I know, said Athos, so take Grimaud. Take Mousqueton, take Bazin, take Planchet, he's frank and skillful, so there are two qualities out of the four. Gentlemen, said Aramis, the chief thing is not to know which of our four valets is the most discreet, the strongest, the most cunning, or the bravest, but to find out which of them is the most fond of money. What Aramis says is full of sense, said Athos. It is necessary to calculate upon the defects of mankind, and not upon their virtues. Monsieur Abbé, you are a great moralist. Unquestionably so, said Aramis, for we need to be well served, not only to succeed, but not to fail, since in case of failure it will endanger the head, not of the valet. Not so loud, Aramis. You're right, not of the valet, resumed Aramis, but of the master, or even of the masters. Are our valets sufficiently devoted to us to hazard their lives for us? No. Faith, said D'Artagnan, I would almost answer for Planchet. Well then, my dear friend, add to that devotion a good round sum, which we will secure him some independence, and instead of answering for him once, you may answer twice. Ah, good God, you will be deceived just as much, said Athos, who was an optimist in reasoning on things, and a pessimist when reasoning on men. They will promise everything to get money, and then when the occasion comes, fear will prevent their acting. Once taken, they will be imprisoned, and once imprisoned, they will confess everything. What the plague, we're not children. To get to England, Athos lowered his voice, one must pass through the whole of France, which is thickly sown with the spies and creatures of the cardinal. Then a passport is necessary for embarkation. Then English must be spoken to find the way to London. I see that it's a very difficult affair. Not at all, said D'Artagnan, who was very anxious that the thing should be accomplished. I can see that it is easy enough. We know without being told, vive Dieu, that if we wrote to Lord de Winter, loudly proclaiming all manner of enormities concerning the cardinal— Not so loud, said Athos. or communicating state secrets and intrigues, continued D'Artagnan, profiting by his friend's warning. We know without being told that we should all be broken on the wheel, but for God's sake, do not forget what you have said yourself, Athos, that we only write about a family affair, that we write with the sole motive of getting this lady, as soon as she arrives in London, placed in such a situation that she cannot injure us. I would therefore write him a letter in something like these terms. Now let us hear, said Aramis, putting on a critical face beforehand. Sir and dear friend. Ah, yes, dear friend to an Englishman, broke in Athos. That's a good start. Bravo, D'Artagnan, for that word alone you will be quartered instead of broken on the wheel. Well, then I would say, sir, quite short. You might even say my lord, rejoined Athos, who thought a good deal of the proprieties. My lord, do you remember that little enclosure for goats near the Luxembourg? Good, the Luxembourg indeed. They will be taken for an allusion to the Queen Mother. How very ingenious, said Athos. Well, then we will simply say, my lord, do you remember a certain little enclosure where your life was spared? My dear D'Artagnan, said Athos, you never will be anything but a vastly bad composer. Where your life was spared. For shame! It is not dignified. No one reminds a gallant man of such services. A benefit cast up is always an insult. Ah, my dear fellow, said D'Artagnan, you are unbearable, and if one must write under your critical eye, I renounce the task. And you do so wisely. Handle the sword and the musket, my dear boy. You perform those exercises admirably well, but give up the pen to the abbé. It is his vocation. Yes, said Porthos, give up the pen to Aramis, who writes theses in Latin. Very well, so be it, answered D'Artagnan. Compose this note for us, Aramis, but by our holy father the Pope, mind what you are about, for I shall pluck you in turn, I warn you. I ask nothing better, said Aramis, with that natural confidence which every poet has in himself. But first make me acquainted with all the circumstances. I have indeed heard now and then that his sister-in-law is a minx. I have, in fact, got proof of it by listening to her conversation with the cardinal. Zounds, not so loud, then, cried Athos. But, continued Aramis, the particulars I do not know. Nor I either, said Porthos. D'Artagnan and Athos looked at one another for some time in silence. At last, Athos, having collected himself and become even paler than usual, gave a sign of assent, and D'Artagnan understood that he might speak. Well, then, here's what you must write, resumed D'Artagnan. My lord, your sister-in-law is a wicked woman who wished to have you killed in order to obtain your inheritance. But she could not marry your brother, being already married in France, and having been— D'Artagnan stopped as if he were seeking for the right word and looked at Athos. Driven away by her husband, dictated Athos. Because she had been branded, continued D'Artagnan. Bah, said Porthos, impossible. And did she wish to have her brother-in-law killed? Yes. And she was really married, demanded Aramis. Yes. And her husband found out that she had a fleur-de-lis on her shoulder? Cried Porthos. Yes. 3 times Athos had uttered this yes, each time in a more gloomy tone. And who saw this fleur-de-lis? Demanded Aramis. D'Artagnan and myself, or rather, to observe the chronological order, I and D'Artagnan, replied Athos. And the husband of this horrible creature is yet alive? Inquired Aramis. Yes. You are quite sure of it? There was a moment of profound silence, during which each felt himself affected according to his disposition. This time, said Athos, first breaking silence, D'Artagnan has given us a good start, and it is that which we must write first. The devil, said Aramis, you're right, Athos, and the composition is difficult. The Chancellor himself would be at a loss to compose an epistle of this significancy, and yet the Chancellor draws up a criminal process very agreeably. Never mind, be quiet, I will write. Aramis took a pen, reflected for a few moments, and then wrote 8 or 10 lines in a charming little feminine hand. Then, in the soft and slow voice, as if every word had been scrupulously weighed, he read what follows. My lord, the person who writes these few lines had the honor of crossing swords with you in a little enclosure in the Rue de l'Enfer. As you have been kind enough since often to declare yourself the friend of that person, he he is bound to reciprocate that friendship by an important warning. You have twice escaped being the victim of a near relation, whom you consider your heiress, because you know not that before contracting her marriage in England, she had been already married in France. But the third time, which is now, you might become her victim. Your relation has left La Rochelle for England. Watch for her arrival, for she has great and terrible designs. If you wish really to know of what she is capable, read her past history on her left shoulder. Well, that is admirable, said Athos, and you have the pen of a Secretary of State, my dear Aramis. De Winter will keep a good lookout now, provided he receives the letter, and should it ever fall into the hands of his Eminence, we could not be compromised. But as the valet whom we send might make us believe that he had been to London, whilst he only stopped at Châteauroux, give him only half the sum, promising him the other half on receipt of the answer. Have you the diamond? Continued Athos. I have better than that, replied D'Artagnan. I have got the money. And he threw the bag upon the table. At the sound of the gold, Aramis lifted up his eyes, Porthos started, and as for Athos, he remained unmoved. How much is there in this little bag? Said he. 7,000 livres and 12-franc pieces. 7,000 livres! Exclaimed Porthos. Was that paltry little diamond worth 7,000 livres? So it seems, said Athos, since there they are. I presume that our friend D'Artagnan has not put in any on his own account. But, gentlemen, continued D'Artagnan, we forget the Queen. Let us take some little care of the health of her dear Buckingham. It is the least that we owe her. That is true, said Athos, but this concerns Aramis. Well, inquired the latter, coloring, what must I do? Why, replied Athos, it is very simple. Just compose a second letter to that clever person who lives at Tours. Aramis resumed the pen, began to reflect again, and wrote the following lines, which he submitted immediately to the approbation of his friends. My dear cousin. Aha, said Athos, this clever person is your relation. Cousin German, replied Aramis. Practically cousin, Aramis continued. My dear cousin, His Eminence the Cardinal, whom may God preserve for the happiness of France and the confusion of the enemies of the realm, is about to exterminate the rebellious heretics of La Rochelle. It is probable that the aid of the English fleet will not arrive even in time within sight of the place. I might almost venture to say that His Grace of Buckingham will even be prevented from leaving England by some great event. His Eminence is the most illustrious politician of time past, time present, and most probably of time to come. He would extinguish the sun, if the sun were in his way. Give this happy intelligence to your sister, my dear cousin. I dreamed that this cursed Englishman was dead. I do not remember whether it was by poison or by the sword, only I am sure that he was dead, and you know that my dreams are always fulfilled. Be assured, therefore, that you will shortly see me return. Wonderfully good, said Athos. You are the king of poets, my dear Aramis. You are as eloquent as the Apocalypse, yet you are as true as the Gospel. There only remains now the address to put upon this letter. That is easy enough, said Aramis. He folded the letter in a coquettish manner and wrote, Mademoiselle Michon, seamstress at Tours. The three friends looked at each other and laughed. They were caught. Now, gentlemen, said Aramis, you understand that Bazin alone can convey this letter to Tours. My cousin only knows Bazin and will trust no one else. To send any other messenger would only ensure a failure. Besides, Bazin is ambitious and learned. Bazin has read history, gentlemen. He knows that Sextus V became pope after having herded swine, and as he intends to enter the church at the same time as myself, he does not despair of becoming himself a pope, or at any rate a cardinal. You will understand that a man who has such views will not allow himself to be caught, or if he should be caught, will rather suffer martyrdom than speak. Very well, said D'Artagnan, I allow you Bazin with all my heart, only allow me Planchet. Her ladyship once sent him away well caned. Now Planchet has a good memory, and I promise you that, if he thought revenge possible, he would allow himself to be broken on the wheel rather than not affected. If the business at Tours belongs peculiarly to you, then in London it is particularly mine. So I entreat you to choose Planchet, who has on his part already been to London with me, and knows how to say very correctly, London, sir, if you please, and my master, Lord D'Artagnan. You may be quite sure that with this knowledge he will find his way there and back. In that case, said Athos, Planchet must receive 700 livres for each half of his journey, and Bazin 300. That will reduce the sum to 5,000 livres. We will each take 1,000 livres to spend as we please, and we will leave a fund of 1,000, of which the Abbey shall take care, for extraordinary expenses and our common wants. What do you say to that? My dear Athos, said Aramis, you speak like Nestor, who was, as everyone knows, the wisest of the Greeks. Then it is settled, continued Athos. Planchet and Bazin will set out. After all, I'm not sorry to keep Grimaud. He is accustomed to my ways, and I could depend upon him. Yesterday's expedition must have rather shaken him already, and this voyage would undo him altogether. Planchet was sent for to receive his instructions. He had already received some intimation of the journey from his master, who had instanced to him first the glory, then the profit, and lastly the danger. I will carry the letter in the lining of my coat, said Planchet, and will swallow it if I am taken. But then you will be unable to perform your commission, said D'Artagnan. You will give me a copy this evening, which I shall know by heart tomorrow. D'Artagnan looked at his friends as much to say, well, did I not tell you so? Now, continued he, addressing Planchet, you have 8 days to reach Lord de Winter and 8 days to return here, that is, 16 days in all. If on the 16th day from your departure you have not arrived at 8 o'clock in the evening, not a farthing more money shall you have, though you were only later by 5 minutes. Then, sir, said Planchet, buy me a watch. Here, take this, said Athos with heedless generosity, giving him his own, and be a brave lad. Consider that if you talk, if you babble, you will sacrifice the head of your master, who has so much confidence in your fidelity that he has answered for you to us. But remember also that if by any fault of yours any such calamity should befall D'Artagnan, I will hunt you out wherever you may be and completely perforate you. Oh, sir, cried Planchet, humiliated at the suspicion, and particularly alarmed by the calmness of the musketeer. And I, said Porthos, rolling his great eyes, remember that I will skin you alive. Ah, sir! And I, said Aramis with his soft and melodious voice, remember that I will roast you at a slow fire as if you were an untutored savage. Ah, sir! And Planchet began to cry, but we cannot venture to say whether it was from terror on account of the threats he had heard, or from being affected at seeing so close a union of hearts between the four friends. D'Artagnan took his hand. You see, Planchet, said he, that these gentlemen speak thus from affection towards me, but notwithstanding all this, they esteem you. Ah, sir, said Planchet, I shall either succeed or I shall be quartered, and were I even quartered, you may rely upon it that not one piece of me will speak. It was decided that Planchet should start the next day at 8 in the morning, in order that, as he said, he might, during the night, have time to learn the letter by heart. He gained just 12 hours by this arrangement, as he was to return at 8 o'clock on the evening of the 16th day. Just as he was about to mount his horse in the morning, D'Artagnan, who felt his heart inclined toward Buckingham, took Planchet aside. Listen, said he, when you have delivered your letter to the Lord de Winter and he has read it, say to him, watch over the Duke of Buckingham, for they are seeking to assassinate him. But this, do you see, Planchet, is a thing of such momentous importance that I would not even confess to my friends that I had confided the secret to you, and even for a captain's commission I would not write it down. Be easy, sir, said Planchet. You shall see whether you can trust me. Mounted on an excellent horse, which he was about to leave at 20 leagues from La Rochelle, to take the post, Planchet went off at a gallop. His heart was a little shaken by the threats of the musketeers, but on the whole he was in a much favorable state of mind. Bazin left the next morning for Tours and had 8 days allowed him for his expedition. The four friends, during the whole time of their absence, had, as may well be supposed, their eyes more than ever on the watch, their noses in the wind, and their ears upon the alert. The days were consumed in trying to catch every report, to watch the movements of the cardinal, and to scent out the couriers who arrived. More than once an unconquerable anxiety seized them, on being sent for on some unexpected service. They had also to be watchful of their own safety. Her ladyship was a phantom who, having once appeared to anyone, would never more allow him to sleep in tranquillity. On the morning of the 8th day, Bazin, fresh as ever and smiling as usual, entered the room at the Parpaillon, just as the four friends were sitting down to breakfast, saying, according to the agreement they had made, "Monsieur Aramis, here's the answer from your cousin." The four friends exchanged a joyful glance. Half their work was done. It is true that it was the shortest and easiest half. Aramis took the letter, blushing in spite of himself. The writing was vulgar and the spelling wretched. "Good God," said he, laughing, "I decidedly despair of her. This poor Michon will never write like Monsieur de Voiture." "Who does that mean, this poor Michon?" asked the Swiss, who was commencing a gossip with the four friends when the letter was brought. "Oh, mon Dieu, less than nothing," replied Aramis. "She's a charming little seamstress whom I was very much in love with, and from whom I have begged a few lines in her own handwriting by way of remembrance." "Egad," said the Swiss, "if she is as ladylike as her own penmanship, you must be a happy fellow, comrade." Aramis read the letter and handed it to Athos. "Just see what she writes, Athos," said he. Athos threw a glance over the letter, and then, to destroy any suspicions which might have been awakened, read it aloud. "Cousin, my sister and I understand dreams very well, and we are shocking frightened at them. But of yours it may be said, I hope, all dreams are false. Adieu, take care of yourself, and let us hear of you from time to time. Marie Michon." "What dream is she talking about?" asked the dragoon, who had approached whilst they were reading the letter. "Yes, what dream?" said the Swiss. "Oh, vive Dieu," said Aramis, "it is plain enough, about a dream of mine that I told them." "Ah, yes," said the Swiss, "it is quite natural to tell one's dreams, but for my part I never dream at all." "You are very fortunate," said Athos, rising, "and I wish I could say the same thing." "Never," repeated the Swiss, delighted that a man like Athos should envy him in anything. "Never, never." D'Artagnan, seeing Athos rise, did the same, and took his arm and left the room. Porthos and Aramis remained behind to face the gossip of the Swiss and the dragon. As for Bazin, he went to sleep upon a truss of straw, and as he had more imagination than the Swiss, dreamt that Monsieur Aramis, who had become a pope, was placing on his head a cardinal's hat. But, as we have already said, Bazin had, by his fortunate return, removed only a part of the uneasiness which tormented the four friends. The days of suspense are always long, and D'Artagnan especially could have sworn that each of these days was 48 hours long. He forgot the unavoidable delays of navigation. He exaggerated the power of her ladyship. He gave to this woman, who appeared to him to resemble a demon, auxiliaries as supernatural as herself, and he fancied at every noise that they were coming to arrest him, or were bringing Planchet to be confronted with himself and his friends. And more than that, his extraordinary confidence in the worthy Picard diminished day by day. This suspense was so powerful that it infected Porthos and Aramis. Athos alone remained unmoved, as though no danger filled the air around him, and he breathed in his habitual atmosphere. On the 16th day particularly, these signs of agitation were so perceptible in D'Artagnan and his two friends that they could not remain in any one place, and wandered about like shadows on the road by which Planchet was expected to return. "Really," said Athos, "you are not men, you're only children, to let a woman frighten you so much. And, after all, what is it that you fear? Imprisonment? Well, we should be released from prison, as Madame Bonancieux has been. Execution? Why, we gladly expose ourselves every day in the trenches to worse than that, for a bullet might break a leg, and I'm quite sure that a surgeon puts one to more pain in amputating a thigh than an executioner in cutting off a head. So keep yourselves easy. In 2, 4, 6 hours at the latest, Planchet will be here. He has given us his promise, and I, for my part, have great confidence in the promises of Planchet, for he seems to me a very worthy lad." "But what if he should not come?" said D'Artagnan. "Well, and if he should not come, he's been delayed, that's all. He may have fallen from his horse, he may have made a somersault over a bridge, he may have brought on a disease of the chest by running too quickly. Come, gentlemen, let us allow for accidents. Life is a large chaplet of little miseries, which the philosopher shakes with a laugh. Be philosophers like me, gentlemen. Come around the table, and let us drink. Nothing makes the fortune of so rosy a hue as to look at it through a glass of Chambertin." "That is all very well," replied D'Artagnan, "but I'm weary of imagining every time I drink that the wine might have come from her ladyship's cellar." "You are very fastidious," said Athos. "Such a beautiful woman." "A woman with a brand," said Porthos with his hoarse laugh. Athos started, passed his hand over his forehead to wipe off the perspiration, and rose in turn with a nervous agitation that he was unable to restrain. The day, however, glided on, and the evening came more slowly, but at last it arrived. The taverns were now full of customers. Athos, who had pocketed his share of the diamond, now scarcely ever left the Parapet. He had found in Monsieur de Busigny, who moreover had given them a superb dinner, a partner worthy of himself. They were playing together according to custom when the clock struck 7, and they heard the patrols passing to change the guard. At 7:30, the drums beat at the last post. "We are lost," whispered D'Artagnan in Athos's ear. "You mean to say that we have lost," replied Athos with great tranquillity, drawing at the same time 10 pistols from his pocket and throwing them upon the table. "Come, gentlemen," continued he, "that is the last drum, let us go to bed." And Athos left the Parpaillot, followed by D'Artagnan. Aramis came behind, giving his arm to Porthos. Aramis was mouthing verses, and Porthos from time to time tore a few hairs from his mustache in token of despair. But behold, suddenly in the obscurity a shadow was perceptible, of a form familiar to D'Artagnan, and a well-known voice said to him, "Sir, I have brought you your cloak, for it is cold this evening." "Planchet!" exclaimed D'Artagnan, intoxicated with joy. "Planchet!" exclaimed Aramis and Porthos. "Well, yes, Planchet," said Athos. "What is there surprising in that? He promised to be back by 8 o'clock, and it is just now striking 8. Bravo, Planchet, you're a lad of your word, and if ever you leave your master, I will keep a place for you in my service." "Oh, no, never," said Planchet. "I shall never leave Monsieur D'Artagnan." And at that same moment, D'Artagnan felt Planchet slip a small note into his hand. D'Artagnan had a great desire to embrace Planchet, but he was afraid such a mark of delight, conferred upon his valet in the public highway, would look rather odd to any passer-by, so he restrained himself. "I've got the letter," said he to Athos and his friends. "Very well," said Athos, "let us go to our quarters and read it." The letter burned the hand of D'Artagnan. He wished to hurry on, but Athos kept a firm hold of his arm, and the young man was compelled to regulate his speed by that of his friend. They reached their tent at last, and lighted a lamp, and whilst Planchet stood at the door to see that the four friends were not interrupted, D'Artagnan with a trembling hand broke the seal, and opened the long-expected letter. It contained half a line in a hand truly British, and of a brevity truly Spartan. "Thank you. Be easy." Athos took the letter from D'Artagnan's hands, put it to the lamp, lighted it, and did not quit his hold until it was reduced to ashes. Then, calling Planchet, "Now, my boy," said he, "you have a right to the other 700 livres, but you did not run much risk with such a letter as that." "Nevertheless, I have invented a great many ways of securing it," replied Planchet. "Well," said D'Artagnan, "tell us about it." "But it is a long story, sir," answered he. "You're right, Planchet," said Athos. "Besides, the last drum is sounded, and we shall be observed if we burn our light longer than other people." "Well, then, let us go to bed," said D'Artagnan. "Sleep well, Planchet." "Faith, sir, it will be my first time for 16 days." "And mine also," said D'Artagnan. "And mine too," exclaimed Porthos. "And mine too," re-echoed Aramis. "Well, shall I confess the truth? And mine too," said Athos.